documentary is not about the games industry. This documentary is about the place actors can find within one of the fastest growing entertainment sectors in the UK and in the world. One that employs many thousands of actors annually and puts them in front of an audience of tens of millions. Despite what the tabloid press would have you believe, the video games business is not the realm of the mutated denizens of dark cellars, determinedly working towards the destruction of society, laughing while they steal enormous sums of money from hard-working people through shady deals. That's Brexit. To explain the reality of video games, we gathered our experts at Side Global, a company who work hand in hand with the games industry, casting actors for voiceover work as well as for projects involving motion capture and performance capture. To discuss what the games industry actually is, where it came from and where it's going, we spoke to Andy Payne, OBE, a businessman who was there right from the founding of the industry in the 1980s and who is still actively involved today.
So my name's Andy Payne. I'm a games industry professional. I've worked in games all my life, done nothing else for my sins. At the moment I am an investor, founder, advisor, producer of everything around video games. So I only work in video games, and projects that I'm working on at the moment, amongst others, are Animal Farm, which we're figuring out as a game for obvious reasons. Pretty prescient right now. Back then, it was very much a bunch of effectively bedroom coders, mainly boys / men. Many sets of brothers in the UK, which is another story. At least 22 sets of brothers that I could point to, most of whom are still alive and most of whom are still involved in the industry. The industry itself was global without anybody realising it. Each country had a kind of a scene, and distribution was physical. And we didn't really know what was going on in America or Germany, or we knew what was going on in Japan because we bought those games. So, it was a burgeoning industry. It was much like today, tons of talented people with great ideas, with no rule book on a set of changing technology platforms. Where we are is in a period of rich growth. We're in a period whereby the business models are not single. There are multiple business models across the games industry. And that differentiates us massively from the other screen entertainments. I think in a good way, because it gives customers choice, but it can be very challenging. The global games industry is about 100 billion, and that actually is still behind when you add up all of the screen entertainment, TV, films and streaming and everything else. Roughly speaking, that's about 130 to 135 billion. So the games industry is a little bit behind, but the growth curve's much more. And in the video games industry, we are providing high growth, highly productive jobs. And even with all the talk of AI, machine learning, etc., there is still required a lot of human skin and brain and bone to be able to make this stuff. Yeah, I think looking back on it, looking right now, looking forward, the video games industry has never had a stable platform. The platforms have always developed, and that's kept everybody on their toes. And what that means is that as a developer, you have to up your game in order to both anticipate and capitalize on the technology improvements. I mean, in all of our pockets, most of our pockets, we've got smartphones. They've got more power than the PlayStation 1 or a PlayStation 2. And because of the technology moving apace, content needs to catch up, or at least stay ahead. And that's about making sure that games play really well. I mean, they've got to play well, they've got to look good, and they've got to be engineered right.
Finding a place in such an ever-shifting industry can be somewhat daunting for actors and even their agents. Fortunately, help is out there. We spoke to key staff at Side London to look at what their company does.
We are very much about the performance and the character, which I think the actors are about as well. So we're already on the same plane that way. So yes, we're working with games. We're kind of translating what the developers want as well.
Yeah.
But we know that to get the best out of the actors, we need to give them as much information, time, care as possible. So we are very much for taking care of them, and that's everything from casting them correctly, making sure that we're not asking them to do accents that are way out of their remit. We're getting them an excellent director like Kate. We're putting them into a nice booth. Our engineers are fantastic with actors. They're always coming in to make sure that they're comfortable and set up and they're happy to make adjustments. And then there's things like when we're doing shouty sessions, we're making sure that they're not doing very long sessions. We're taking care of their voices as well, because it doesn't make any sense for us to blow out their voices or have a bad experience with us. No. We want them to come back.
Yeah.
And we want them to give their best. I think so. Yeah. Well, yeah, I think most of them are going to, they want the best as well. Mm. So especially since there are so many great games and great performances in games now, they've kind of seen what's possible. So they do want the best. And yeah, I think we have some really good conversations to begin with. And we're being brought in so much earlier now. It's fantastic. Yeah. And now we're talking before they even have green lights, and they're telling us, this is the world we want to build. These are the characters we want to have in it. So we're sort of really early stages, and we can help guide them and in terms of what we're going to need to give them the best. And we're also now getting conversations where they're like, we want to talk to the actors ahead of time. We're still writing, and we want to get them involved and get them involved in their characters. And that's just, it's such a development.
With those projects, as exciting as they are, like you say, from a casting point of view, it's still quite vague, because they've obviously got an idea in their head about the type of story that they want to tell and the type of characters they want to inhabit that story, but not necessarily a specific type. So it's quite intimidating, but at the same time it's quite freeing, because you're then looking for strong young actors who you think are going to be able to go on this journey with the developers, and that they'll be on the same page and they'll shape the story together. So yeah, it's tricky, but I think there's the movement that we've got in it is what's the best part of doing casting like that.
And it's not always locked in, even if they look like they do have everything. I mean, we did a project, I think we must have cast it 2 years ago now, because we recorded it last year. They had character art, they had a full page of bio, they had backstory, we had the relationship to the other characters. We brought in an actress, this was for Blood and Truth, so I don't think was the native to the accent they wanted.
She wasn't.
She then auditioned in the accent they wanted, and Kate did those auditions, didn't she? And she said, you know what, let's just do a take in your native accent, just because. They loved that performance so much that they actually rewrote her backstory to explain why she had a different accent from her dad so that they could have this actress doing the best that she could. We are developing our first program. It's going to be 2 days of final year students coming in to be introduced into our booth. They're doing audio at school, but they are coming in to hear about what it is to perform with the games. Martin's going to be talking about what he's looking for. They can ask him questions. Kate's going to be taking them through ensemble, crowd, and solo performances, and just giving them a bit of exposure to the games world, because they have a year left, and you know what? We're a good opportunity for work.
To fully understand the opportunities available to actors, both those with experience and those who are newly qualified, it's important to talk to people who work in video games. At Side London, we gathered 3 individuals with around 40 years of combined experience in the games industry, 2 of whom work extensively in theatre and television.
For me, it was like a voiceover job. I think my first ever game was Viet Cong. I think it was a long time ago that I did my first game. It was really green at that time, and like I say, I actually, I don't know if I should say, I listened back to my performance because we didn't really know what we were doing, but because we didn't have a director, we had an audio engineer that was taking the session. So I've seen it now. To have someone like Kate, who is, I know she's sitting beside me, is an incredible director. Like to be able to pull out, and kind of push you in ways that you didn't know were going to go, or never thought of, and kind of go, no, I know you have something else in you, and actually building a relationship between an actor and a director. I mean, I love when I walk in and it's Kate, because I know there's already a dialogue that we'll have, and I know where she can take me, and she knows where I can go, and it's really simple. I mean, to go from the audio engineer directing to now the route, like the traditional route now, where the director and actor work with each other to get a performance, we've kind of come full circle, as it were, to get to the point where it is an acting job. It's not a games job. It's a proper acting job. I mean, because you don't forgive your ears, man. If something's slightly out of focus when you're watching a movie, like it's the audio, you really hear it, and if it doesn't ring true, then it's not going to come across. So we really strive for that, I think.
I think that's particularly true for animation, actually, because as you say, if you've got a visual medium with television or film, we can take in so many other things. All of our senses are going with we're looking into the person's eyes, and we're reading other things that we might not hear tonally. But with animated games, it's absolutely got to be in the voice. And I've always said that it's really important to think of the voice as everything, not it is just the voice. So exactly what John's saying, it's not just a voiceover job, it is an acting job where you have to bring the whole performance and character into the voice. And actually that segues into you saying, how did we get into it? Exactly what John said, that there was a time, a while ago where things started moving from engineers directing or developers directing to directors doing it. That's exactly why I got brought in, because Phil Evans, who was one of the owners of Side, knew my theatre directing work and approached me for exactly that reason, knowing that the industry had got to a point where they were not always quite getting the performances they wanted, and the developers weren't quite understanding why. And it was because they were game developers, they weren't directors, they weren't sharing the same language that we would share. And so it came to a point where they needed that missing link, and things very much changed from there on. I think the industry changed quite a lot around that time. I've worked in the industry for probably about 14, 15 years now. Is that right? Something like that. And so obviously I'm a woman in the gaming industry, and yes, we are still a minority, but I think there are a lot of women working in more and more prominent positions now. A lot of game developers and game directors coming forward as women, composers and so on. The world of gaming has changed enormously in the time that I've been involved, in that the ambitions that developers have, the stories they want to tell, are so much more sophisticated now. So I think the industry's having to keep developing and keep maturing with its gamers, and that's only ever going to be a good thing. So I think the idea of it being strange geeky men sat in their back rooms is an antiquated one now, and probably was correct 20 odd years ago, but it certainly isn't that anymore.
Yeah, I have to agree with Kate. I think the way that I've seen it go, and I've been in it just as long as you, maybe even longer, just on the performer side. I've seen them absolutely grow, from sitting in a booth along with another actor, kind of trying to make a scene work, to doing full, bodysuit, mocap, and really kind of getting into some proper acting. I think it's amazing.
There are a lot of wonderful indie companies now, developers like the Chinese Room. They're finding modern ways to use gaming. Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, which is one of the ones I've directed. There's no killing, there's no shooting in it. It's all about investigating.
There's no people.
There's no people in it. It's all about investigating why there's no people in the village. And so when you look at developers' work with things like that, and also this weekend just gone, for example, I was with a good friend of mine whose son is 13, and he's being set homework on games because they want him to learn strategizing, and they think the gaming world is one of the best ways for him to learn, and he's at a posh boys' school. My friend was quite shocked, but he'd come home and said, we need a better computer because I need to be able to play games because I need to for my schoolwork. We've come a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the range of stories and characters that you find in games now, it's just grown so much in the time that I've been casting them. Just the range of briefs that come through and the types of narratives that they can tell. It's just, as the guy said, it's the range of it has just grown so much as the technology's grown, and the types of stories that they can tell and want to tell in games has grown. Absolutely, and when I started having discussions with them about joining, it was clear that there wasn't really a lot of games representation within the guild itself. So
I think you're there first.
It is, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, it is exciting because there are people obviously that have never worked within that medium, and I've not worked within their medium. So the fact that we're able to coexist and learn from each other, and that all of those mediums are being taken seriously together, it's really exciting.
I mean, congratulations, man. That is such good news, because putting together a cast, again, that is believable, man, that takes a lot, because there is a huge amount of talent in one game, let alone the range that Side does. With people's attitudes changing over the years, it's over the past 10 years that I've been doing it, you've been able to see that they're the guys that are obviously gamers that get really excited about doing this stuff, and then they're the ones that come into it completely fresh, who actually, once they get to know it, the ins and outs of it, and Kate taking them through it, it just gets, you can see their juices start flowing, and they really start to appreciate what's going to happen.
For the acting industry, it is a massive employer, and I recommend all young actors to learn about performing in games, because there is a huge hole in their possible career if they don't. I can't tell you the thousands, literally thousands of actors that we know who didn't work in games before we got them involved, and they've just never looked back. They've ditched their day job working in a bookshop or their bar job that they've always had to do between their theatre and their TV work. Yep. And these are not just actors you don't know. This thing, of course, of a lot of actors who we know still do a day job. There are so many more actors now in this country who've ditched their day job because they've now broken into the games industry, and they can get enough work in that as well to keep their career going. And I think I used to be an actor as well many eons ago, and at that time there's a lot of snobbery about commercials. It's probably a similar thing to what it was about games 20 years ago as well. That you wouldn't do an ad unless you were a certain sort of actor, but now I think all those snobberies have gone. That it's imperative that actors work across the industry, radio, film, TV, commercials, games, voiceover, so on and so forth, because that is the way the industry works. As Martin says, the industry is working together now, and it's imperative to have a career to be able to work across the forms.
I find that computer game acting, and where it is a heightened sense of performance and thing, you have to get out of the way of yourself. And I find that it is completely liberating, and you learn very quickly just to stopping yourself. When we go and do sessions where we're throwing pieces of metal across a studio while saying a line, and all that kind of stuff, it's absolutely liberating, and I find that it helps inform the other stuff, because there's no embarrassment. You might be embarrassed about something on your head and jumping around looking like what I would have said was a fool, but no, man, we're doing something amazing. Any young actor or whatever who's not thinking about doing this work, there's more games and more apps and content and everything that people need. Just jumping in both feet and then getting out of the way of yourself. The performance is the same, as long as the story comes through. As long as the story comes through.
And also in terms of comparisons to the industry, performance capture, because you can capture a whole scene and you've got the cameras on all four sides, I liken it to theatre in the round. So the actors can perform truthfully as if it's a real life scene. They don't have to play to a fourth wall. We can play the whole scene. It's not like television when you have to just look at one camera position at a time. So actually that is very familiar to actors with any sort of training. What we've tended to find, I think, in casting and at side with game directing is that theatre actors often land the roles, whereas TV actors, maybe because they're very used to it being quite small and in the eyes, maybe are not quite as expressive with their voice always, and not as likely, interestingly enough, to land them. Obviously, many actors work in all forms, like John does. But with young actors, the ones that are kind of theatre savvy, and musical theatre, in fact musicians as well, because they have that musicality, tend to be the ones that find the form easier to slot into, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that, you know, the musical background I think sometimes helps in terms of accents and hearing a specific sort of thing, and the theatre actors are much, I mean, from a director's point of view, you find it easier, I think, to work with, just because they've got that certain training and language that you're able to use. And
like John says, that sense of play and improvisation, you know, any young actor knows about improvising and imagination. That is absolutely what the games industry needs, whether you're in a performance capture studio or a voiceover studio. That's all you need. I have not yet met an actor who hasn't loved working in games.
And I think
no, never
you described it before, like with performance capture, it's almost like you're in the rehearsal room, because you're kind of stripping everything away that an actor's, like a set and a costume and all those kind of things, and just kind of everything's in their imagination, and it must be really fun to just build it all.
It's incredible. I just my first mocap, it was like you described. We kind of went, where's the camera? Went, it's there, and went, oh, what do we do? You just do the scene, like let's work the scene. I was like, oh, and then you kind of went, okay, this is free. When you're used to having a camera in your face like that, you know, you learn to do that. But when you see it's all around you, if you're, you know, you've got the 360, everything, you got the suit on, when you know that if you turn, you're still going to be captured, where you're not playing to an audience, you're not playing to a camera, you're just playing the scene, and that's where it is freeing. It's totally freeing.
Easy, actually. We've been very much keen to stress at side that you don't have to be an experienced games actor to audition for a game. And I've had many mocap shoots with full casts of actors who've never done a game before, and it really doesn't take very long to get them familiar with, you know, it feels a little bit exposing at first, I'm sure, being in a skin-tight bodysuit.
My best look.
Yeah, but once they've got over that and they've all had a sneaky side look at each other's bodies, it's fine.
That never happened.
Didn't know about that, did you?
Yeah. So, actually, it's not difficult. There's a sort of myth around the industry, I think, as well, that you've got to be a games actor. It's nonsense. We're always saying, no, you've got to be a good actor. No. You know, it's as outdated as saying, oh, you're a radio actor or you're a theatre actor. No, an actor is an actor.
Yeah.
Yes, drama schools very much are starting to embrace it. I've been working with Lambda for several years now, going in and doing masterclasses on acting for games. Also with Drama Studio for several years. Guildhall, I did a whole term with them, and RADA want to start doing it as well. They've done little bits and bobs, but they haven't started it fully yet, but they're going to. In terms of what I tend to go in and do is anything from a masterclass that looks at the basics of acting for games, going through what a voiceover might entail in terms of what a cutscene is, what barks are, what the different demands of a voiceover job might be on a game, and how to prepare for them, how to technically save your voice, how to know what's a useful note and what isn't, because there's still situations where there's not necessarily somebody that's going to have their back in the room. So I go through those sort of things with them, and also a performance capture sort of rundown about what the suit is, what ROMs are, what a T pose and A pose is, all those kind of things. I go through examples of work and explore the work with them, and then when I've worked on more extensive courses like at Guildhall, we've been able to really explore all those different aspects that I've talked about over a few months.
I do envy them because it's just going at the speed of light. I mean, the changes in the industry and the way that the performance capture nowadays. I mean, the emotion that you get in the faces when you see a close up it's incredible. I want to say it's not all sweetness and light. You know, there have been sessions here where I've wanted to cry, you know, because you're not only working with, say, Kate, but you're working with a client who may be 8 time zones away, who just isn't getting what they want. And there's a disconnect and everyone's trying. So it can be seriously tough.
Obviously, every job's different. The client requirements are different. There are different sorts of briefs. Obviously, there's performance capture. There's voice only. There are lots of different types of games castings. I think when it comes to VO casting, it's down to how engaging the voice is, how good an actor they are, and how well I think they're going to fit into that world. It's something that I get asked quite a bit about. I haven't got a games reel. Do I need to make one? And it's one of those things that I always think, not necessarily really. There are obviously certain types of games where that's going to be, if I can hear a certain thing in a games reel, sure, but it's definitely not essential, because if I can hear a good actor doing an audiobook read or a narrative read, that's where I'll go, and that's how I'll gauge how suitable they are for a particular project.
And you'll look at normal TV reels, won't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, TV reels, any kind of reels. It's interesting though with the drama schools, like quite a lot of them are coming out with voice reels and stuff like that now, that when I first started casting on stuff, that wasn't the case. So I think that shows that it's being taken as a viable thing now, that they're going to be doing audiobooks, games, all of that stuff where they utilise their voice. So it's really important.
I think that the drama schools need to bring people in from the industry, because obviously it's a relatively new form, and it's evolving and changing so much that every time I'm on a performance capture shoot or something, the technology will be different. So I suspect that it would be a lot of engagement with the industry. I'm bringing in people that are people like Martin, directors, performers, mocap studio managers, to talk and workshop those sort of sides of things, but also to engage with dramatic performance through voice and making sure that that's very familiar to the actors.
That's such a good shout. I mean, it is concentrating on the voice for games, because it is slightly different. When actors will put their voice wherever it needs to be, whether it be at the back of the house or down a microphone, or think about the person listening. That we do that, but absolutely, if I go in and go to drama school and I teach them about audition preparation, or being in the room, or networking, or performance, it is the same thing. Going in and say, just be prepared, because they're going to come out into the big wide world of casting, and they need to be prepared. And it's all about knowing what you guys are looking for. The
practical stuff too. What is an NDA? Why would you be asked to sign it?
Yeah.
All of those things, I think, can be some young actors come out of training and have no idea what all of that is.
I made a boo-boo once, and I would never make another boo-boo. It was, and and I didn't mention anything really, kind of, but I did. It's kind of cryptic, and I thought, no one's gonna know. And then I was like, oh my god, I got an email from Side, and I was like, oh, I'll take it down. And then it was in the news. It was in the gaming news, and I thought, oh my! But thank God I wasn't the only person that week that had done it.
And working with range, because games don't they do cast a role, but they'll cast you for the game. So an actor can be booked on a game and play many, many roles, and I think that can be a bit of a shock to young actors.
Yeah.
So dexterity with the voice, and being able to, as John said, leap in, use your imagination, not hold yourself back, and come out with all sorts of different characters is very useful.
Yeah.
Also, accents, very useful. The fashion is very much to try and cast native, isn't it? A native
Absolutely,
accent,
yeah.
if it's a main role. But because you might play loads of other roles, if there's an actor who has a native accent, such as like John does, but that can also say at the end, and we go, oh, we've also got an Irish gang and a Cockney gang and can you do any of those? An actor that goes, yeah, actually I can. I'm not great, but if there's only 3 lines here and there, I'll be absolutely fine. Just give me a minute. That is very useful. So lots of work with dialects, I'd say, was important too.
Yeah, and just coming out with that material available and a range of stuff, as Kate said, it's really important. Just because if I can't hear it, then I won't be casting it. Last year we actually employed around 600 unique actors, so there's obviously a lot of engagement and employment within the games industry. It's a huge employer and it's just growing all the time.
As a storyteller, like knowing an arc, if it's a nice big game, knowing the world you're in and the crap and kind of fitting into that and coming into it knowing I'm going to be this week, I'm going to be in this massive, expansive universe and kind of doing that. And I've been in massive games and I've been in small games. And, we did Mirror's Edge. Like, a couple of us did 1,000 voices because that's all, at that point, that was what there was. And kind of, but that's the world. The craft is going, like you say as well, I have to be this person. And I know that I can't be the same. I'm going to have to be a different character in the next scene. So being able to jump into another character on the same day is that for me is the best thing. That's just playing.
Because I direct across different genres, I direct theatre and games and television. For me, I do the same job. I'm all about the text comes first, tell the story, help the actors to be the best they can be, to make that writer's word sing. That fundamentally is all my job is, whether that's for stage or a game or television. Obviously, the medium changes massively, whether I'm looking through a conventional camera and looking at the picture as well. But it's all about making sure that clarity is there and that there's a clear story arc and that there's truth and that there's a kind of muddy fallibility. I never want clean lines, really. Not really interested in that. But that's also subjective to me. All directors are going to be slightly different. So I think one thing that is specific to games, perhaps more than the other two forms, is that I have to work very, very quickly, and so do the actors. So making sure that I'm succinct and as eloquent as I can be about a note, because we haven't got time in the booth for me to wax lyrical about something. Translating is a word I would use as well in terms of my role between the game developer and the performers, because a really, really basic example is a game developer will often say, let's say John's in the booth and he's playing Dandelion in The Witcher. He's not playing Geralt, who's the player character, but the developer will often say, what you're doing at this point is you're charging through the field and you're going to meet up with Dandelion. I'm like, that's not what he's doing. That's what Geralt's doing. Because a game developer will say you to mean the player. So even at really, really basic level, that can be very confusing for an actor, especially if they haven't done a game before, because they might be playing the antagonist to the you. So yes, translating does very much come into it, and trying to articulate what the developer wants, and often using a different language than the developer has used to explain it to me, because the language they've used is not as actor friendly as the language that I can hopefully use. I should actually qualify, some game developers are obviously brilliant directors, so it varies, but just simple things like actors learning, if they're speaking to a crowd, to ask the question, is that crowd 4 people or is it 400 people? Because that is a big difference to how they should perform it. And those are exactly the things that might not be readily given to the actor without the actor knowing to ask those sort of questions. So to contextualize the world that they're in and that exact line, and to make sure they're truthful to that environment and that moment and the urgency or not of the situation. All of that stuff's important for them to think about.
Motion and performance capture in film and television is well known, while virtual reality films and augmented reality concerts and performances are becoming more common. However, we want to explore the use of technology more often associated with games at the cutting edge of theatre. Across from the Old Vic and a stone's throw from the Young, we talk to the founder of the National Theatre's Immersive Storytelling Studio.
I'm Toby Coffey, Head of Digital Development at the National Theatre, where we set up the Immersive Storytelling Studio. So my undergraduate degree was in psychology, human-computer interaction and artificial intelligence, and I did a dissertation in 1994 about how in the future, we would be able to use virtual reality to rehabilitate offenders and treat people with certain kind of cognitive issues, for example. So to actually be making VR now is a relevance that I didn't see coming at that point in time. I set up and ran a design and marketing agency for a period of time, and we did a lot of work with the arts. I came down to London and signed up to come to the National Theatre for 12 months just to see how it was, and then that was 13 and a half years ago. Rufus Norris, who's the artistic director, and Lisa Berger, who's the exec director, when they started their kind of tenure in 2015, Lisa had been like a mentor of mine for since I've been here. Rufus was new, and so he was doing lots of meetings with lots of people to see what their objectives for their areas were. And in that meeting, I showed him a 360 film, and he was really, really compelled. He just said, look, you don't know where this is going, I don't know where this is going, but the potential for dramatic storytelling is really, really significant, and we need to find out what it means to us, what we can do with it, but also how the craft of theatre influences work generally to be made in this way. So that very much kind of helped recognise that this is a priority for us going forward, and we had a number of projects that we were therefore developing in this area. One of them was Wonder.land, which you can go into in more detail, but it became apparent that actually when we were talking to whoever we were externally, whether the potential investors or the partners, to talk about 5 to 10 projects that are all working with different types of immersive technology and quite cutting edge, it's slightly intangible in a way because there's so many points that people don't necessarily understand. So we decided to wrap that strand of work up as a studio and call it the Immersive Storytelling Studio, at which point when you say to somebody we've set up the Immersive Storytelling Studio, and they go, oh right, cool. There's no more information in there. They think they understand what that is going to be. And also at that point in time, we got the physical studio, which is 8 shipping containers welded together in the car park of the studio and the new work department, which feels like a very appropriate place for us to be, because we've got the independence of ourselves as a studio, but we've also got the relationship and incredible support of the main organisation. When people ask us about what our strategy is and like how you start to devise a plan for something like the studio, the first thing is that our strategy is defined by the organisation's strategy. So we're not some curveball off doing its own thing. Everybody recognises that yes, we are a new studio, but the work that we are doing is in line with the ambitions of the organisation, which is to make incredible theatre that's relevant for everybody. Actors, writers, directors, designers, everybody has been incredibly excited to work in this area with us, and quite often we get people coming to say, can we get involved? Is this something that we can do? I find very much that creatives who have been schooled in theatre are very adaptable to the form, because again, writers, directors, designers, performers, choreographers, everyone recognises and has been trained to work in an area whereby your audience are not all in the same position. They can be in a complete variety of places. They've got the freedom to look wherever they want to look, and it's the craft of direction and everything else that gets them to see the performance that you want them to see. And that's a little closer to kind of VR in a way than traditional film, which is beautifully crafted around the frame and the edit. There's been a kind of natural bleed, I would say, of people in theatre coming to be involved in projects. I think it depends what the technology you're working with. You know, in something like cinematic VR, for example, that's much closer to a normal performance. If you've got actresses working in motion capture suits for a live animation, then there are new skills we're needing to learn there, because it's like puppetry in a way. You need to learn how to manipulate the puppets to do what you want them to do, and there are certain things that you will find you need to change the way you might ordinarily do something to get the effect that you actually want on screen or in the headset. Once people have got over the kind of initial onboarding is such a techie word, but like become familiar with what the potential and the opportunity is, then freeing is definitely a word. It was almost standard practice that we would bring in a writer or a director and we would show them some work. And either they'd go quiet for a period of time or they'd just start talking for a period of time. But one way or another, it was that freedom of the brain. They were like, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. Which is great. That's the kind of enthusiasm that you want. What we do as a studio is we bring those artists together with creative technologists, so people who understand the art form as much as they understand the technology, and then work out how we can develop new forms of performance, storytelling, audience experience. What we do isn't blue sky research. We take managed risks in certain areas of technology and performance, and that's the kind of framework we work within. But that in itself is incredibly liberating for a creative. We've got a variety of different partners and different types of partners. So we work with Accenture, who are our sponsor for innovation at the NT, but also very specifically support the studio. And they worked with us on All Kinds of Limbo, which is the communal VR piece that we have on at the moment. It's a communal experience for up to 20 people using mobile headsets. So they developed a tracking system that basically allows the system, and therefore audiences, to know where other members of the audience are, because it's a room scale experience. You move around. We couldn't have done that project without them, but also it felt like it was a very symbiotic relationship. Then we've got other creative technologists who purely work in creative industries all the time. They are very, very good at working in the way that we do, where sometimes we might start a project not knowing what the end solution is going to be, but that's okay, because you know you're in the room with the right people, and they will be able to help you realise what it is that you need to do. We always seem to get the feedback that these are really interesting projects, and therefore it's great for people to kind of do that kind of thing. It's very much the case that each project that we do is completely new, and it is a step on from what's been done before. When we did our installation for Wonder.land, which had a VR component, but also the brief was to create a space that was sat somewhere between Tracy Emin's bed and an 80s game and arcade, which it did, and actually had a bed in the middle of it because it was to look like Ali, her bedroom in the show. Well, over 90,000 people did the VR in 5 months, which is just way above what we kind of expected. The next project that we did, which was a cinematic documentary about a 22-year-old Sudanese refugee in the Calais jungle, that worked not to those kind of audience numbers, but really kind of did the job in helping people understand the perspective of what it would be like to be in those conditions, and the circumstances that you get there in the first place. And, you know, having conversations where we're showing people at events and somebody works for a certain council, for example, and says, please, can I show this to the people who are responsible for these kind of issues in our local council? They need to see this because they don't understand, they don't have that perspective. So to be able to be creating content that lands the message that you're trying to land so clearly was very rewarding. So Draw Me Close came from a workshop that we did with the National Film Board of Canada, and Jordan Tannehill is the writer-director. What he decided to do is to create a memoir piece about the relationship between him and his mother. And you are Jordan in this encounter. His mother is unfortunately terminally ill with stage 4 cancer, and although it's not a cancer piece, it's a very strong part of the story. What happens when you go to the performance is you take off your shoes, you're taken into a quiet space, and then you have a headset put on and speakers that sit over your kind of collar. It's like a collar that goes round. And then inside the headset, it's complete blank canvas. Then lines start to appear, and it becomes an illustration of the house that Jordan lived in when he was 5 years old. And you're stood on the path in front of the front door, and he's narrating over and said, this is the house that I lived in when I was 5, this is where Mum was diagnosed. Some more contextual information. You can obviously look around and see the garden, and then he says, come on, let's go in. And when you look to the you can see an illustrated door handle in front of you, and when you reach out, there's actually a physical door handle there. And when you open the door, it's a room scale experience, so you walk into the living room, and you're living in a live illustrated world that's got physical props to reinforce what you're seeing. And so as you go into the living room, you then feel the power of the carpet under your feet, which is incredibly important. And I didn't realise that, at the very beginning when we were doing the tech ride, I thought we were going to need. And then all of a sudden we were like, we need a 10 metre by 10 metre pristine white carpet. And I was like, okay. You walk around the living room, he says, there's the National Geographic, there's the telly, and then Mum comes home from work, and the reason Mum exists visually is that there's an actress in a motion capture suit in the space with you who's playing the role of mother. So if the actress does that in real life, then the illustrated mother does that in VR. Mum does what any mum would do, is when you come home to your 5-year-old kid, she comes in and gives you a hug, because you're 5-year-old Jordan at this point. So you see the illustrated mother coming in, and then you feel the physical hug itself, and that's what I call the holy shit moment, because you see it in body language more than anything else. The audience are realising what this experience actually is. And then she says, God, Jordan, your feet stink, go and open the window. And as you look over, there's a sash window over there. You go over and open the window. The soundscape changes because you can hear outside coming in, and people put their head outside to have a look around, and they talk about the breeze, but there is no breeze. It's something that we've found quite consistently, is people fill that sensory gap in. They expect to feel a breeze, and therefore the brain tells them that they're feeling a breeze, but there isn't actually one there. And you spend an evening with Mum at that point in time, and so there's live drawing, you draw with Mum on the floor, etc. And then at the end of that evening, the scene changes, that the living room draws out, your bedroom draws in, and she takes you to bed and she tucks you into bed, which again is another moment where people are like, the last time I got tucked into bed was 40 years ago. People are very, very moved by the experience. And in Tribeca, which was just the 6-minute version, as a means of to start a cathartic conversation, if that's what somebody wanted, I just said, when was the last time you were tucked into bed? Because that's where the experience ends. Which actually turned out not to be the best question, because quite a few men said I was never tucked into bed as a child. And you just realise you've just added another layer onto what their experience was. And then Jordan wrote in the caregiving more into the actual overall show itself when we did it, the latest version of the Young Vic. And that really seems to work. That project is very significant, I think, in terms of how audiences respond to that type of work. And actually we did some research as well with I2, and they came back. But one of the things was that 94% of people that were surveyed said that Draw Me Close had increased their expectations of what theatre could do. And so as a feedback on a studio which is looking at how we push theatre in new directions and we bring new people in, is a great thing to hear. The most recent piece we've got, Four Kinds of Limbo, which is you're in the performance space with a volumetrically captured performer and orchestra. We very much wanted to rely on traditional aspects of performance and the ceremony of performance. So we've changed the Wolfson Gallery into 2 performance spaces, and those spaces have performance times on the hour at 22. It's a ticketed event, there's no late entry. You all do the experience together, start exactly at the same time. When you put the headset on, you can hear the orchestra warming up in the background. I very much wanted people to feel like they'd been to a performance as much as they'd seen a piece of VR or experienced a piece of VR. First of all, it's a great exercise in choreography, because the performer moves to different points in the space and the audience very much follow where the performer is, and it's very common that people applaud at the end, as you would do in a normal performance, which is great. Quite a few couples, when they do the experience together, will hold hands or have their arms around each other, or actually properly dance with each other. There was a couple who started holding hands, had their arms around each other, then went in for a slowie, as in face-to-face, at which point the headsets bashed into each other. I was like, this is not a problem that I saw coming, but it's a really interesting one. One of the problems that VR struggles with at this point in time in 2019 is the isolating nature of it, and actually to be able to deliver a communal experience in which people actually do normal forms of intimacy or interaction is again a very interesting provocation. So how do we take that back to the creative teams that we've been talking to over the past couple of years and say, okay, knowing that this is a possibility, how do we absorb that into the things that we can do as a storytelling kind of ambition, and how do we use that appropriately? And everything is used appropriately. Tech or interaction always has to justify its place. It can never be there as a gimmick, because I think that never works. In the next 2 to 3 years, what we are working on are how we create mixed reality or virtual reality shows on a sustainable level. So, for example, I've established a producer-led strand more recently, which says, okay, if we say that we want to have a show which will have a cast of 5, an audience of 50 to 75, it's mixed reality or virtual reality, and it's an hour long, such that we might run it 6 times a day, and it needs to be commercially sustainable. What does the performance model look like for that? What does the technical infrastructure look like for that? What is the commercial model for that? Let's establish all those as kind of templates in a way, such that we can then, the work that we're doing in the artist-led strand, we can start to bleed that over into that more formal structure, which creatives are really keen to do. Freedom is one thing, but also having quite clear parameters about what you're designing to or creating for is also really helpful. So I think there's a genre of work that will be developed, a new genre of work that will be developed, whereby the technology and the immersion have been considered right at the very beginning, in the same way that the writing and the directing was. So it's not something that's brought in further down the line. It's actually been part of the devising process at the very beginning. And for me, that's a new genre of work. None of this is any suggestion that this is a replacement of any form of theatre at all. It's a new type of theatre. So I would call that full immersive stagings. Then there is how you use, in the way that we have done for thousands of years, technology in existing theatre spaces. So, we're all completely au fait with projection and projection mapping now, and how that gets used in shows and stuff. There will be experiences in the not too distant future where you've got an auditorium of people with mixed reality headsets on, or where the experience is facilitated by new technologies. We did have a request from a director and a designer last year, I think, to stage an augmented reality show, but we all felt that the technology wasn't ready. We hadn't had enough experience as how to create the right audience experience, something like that. So, how is that experience different for the person at the back of the circle versus in the middle of the stalls? There's a lot of experimental work that needs to be done there to deliver a really good audience experience. So we know that stuff's coming at some point, but it should come with the right level of creative development behind it. So I think there's work that we will devise right from the very beginning. Then there's how we kind of augment an existing venue, a show in an existing venue. I think very much that other type of work quite often will need its own found space. And I talk quite a lot about venues of the future as much as performance of the future. And then the third strand, which is further away, I think that's more 10 to 15, even 20 years, is the mechanisms of capture that are becoming available. Actually, to have life-size volumetric capture in a performance is quite significant in terms of what we've got in all kinds of limbo. It was part of, I think it was the Japanese Olympic bid, they'd said, which was never going to happen, that they were going to capture entire stadiums and then rebroadcast the stadium to other stadia around the world. So people in Mexico would be watching a holographic projection of the stadium in Japan. That is definitely an area of direction of where we are going. At that point in time, the cameras to do that didn't even exist, but they are now being developed. And so the potential for that type of large-scale holographic life-size broadcast, in a way, is the bigger picture further down the line, I think.
Over the past 40 years, the games industry, both within this country and globally, has grown into a multi-billion-dollar business. Annually, it employs many thousands of actors, and this number can only rise as the technology continues to grow and develop. Technology previously only associated with video games is now being used in film, television, and in the theatre. Working in games gives actors early and regular exposure to that technology. Drama schools across the UK have already recognised the games industry for what it is, one of the largest employers of acting talent. Students need to be prepared by their drama schools for work in this sector. Any drama school that fails to provide the relevant training will be left behind. This is no longer a choice. It's time, dare I say it, to get with the games.